There is something deeply unsettling about the ordinary. We go through our days surrounded by routine, the familiar rhythm of work, errands, packages dropped at the door, a pizza arriving on a Friday night. These are the small, comfortable rituals that make life feel predictable and safe. We trust the systems. We trust the strangers who show up at our front doors wearing uniforms. We trust that when we drive down a quiet street to complete a simple task, we will come home exactly the same way we left. But every now and then, the ordinary cracks open. And what crawls out from beneath it is something you never could have prepared yourself for. Tonight, we are going to sit together and explore a collection of stories from people whose jobs put them out there, on the road, at strangers' doors, in unfamiliar neighborhoods, carrying food and packages and Christmas cards and goodwill. Delivery drivers. Postal workers. Pizza boys on bicycles. Truck drivers rolling through the dark on empty highways. People who were simply doing their jobs, doing them well, doing them with pride, and who stumbled, completely without warning, into something that changed them forever. These are not stories of monsters or supernatural creatures lurking in the shadows. They are stories about something far more unsettling than that. They are stories about people. About the strange, broken, frightening, and sometimes heartbreakingly mysterious things that human beings are capable of. About the moments when your gut tells you something is wrong before your mind can catch up. About that bone-deep prickling feeling, that warning signal your body sends out when danger is closer than you realize. Some of these stories end with a sigh of relief. Some of them end with more questions than answers. And some of them leave a mark that no amount of time can fully wash away. So settle in. Get comfortable. Turn up the volume. Because every single one of these people showed up to work one day thinking it would be just another ordinary shift, and none of them were right. If this is your first time joining us here, welcome to the channel. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. We are so glad you found us, and trust me, you are going to want to stick around. Now, let us begin. Story 1, The Bone Prickles. Our first story comes from a young woman in her early 20s, a college student doing everything she can to get through school with as little debt weighing her down as possible. She's resourceful, practical, and determined. She works multiple jobs, stays active, and squeezes every productive hour she can out of her days. One of those jobs, whenever she has a spare window of time, is driving for Uber Eats. She'd never had a reason to write in before this. But one particular night last month gave her plenty of reason. In her own words, something majorly messed up happened to her, and she needed to tell someone about it. On the evening in question, an order came through on her app. A McDonald's delivery, originating from a location she was already close to. She accepted it without hesitation. She went inside, waited longer than she would have liked for the food to be prepared, teenagers behind the counter moving at the kind of unhurried pace that only teenagers can get away with, and then she was back in her car, thermal bag in hand, heading for the delivery address. That's when she noticed something slightly off. She knew this town well. She had driven these streets many times over. But this particular address was not one she recognized at all. She followed the directions anyway. And as she drove, the neighborhoods around her began to shift. The fairly worn-down urban area she started in gave way to something else entirely, a stretch of suburbia that felt like it had been forgotten by the rest of the world. Houses that sat dark and hollow, windows boarded over, front yards reclaimed by weeds. The kind of place that makes you feel, inexplicably, like time stopped moving there a long time ago. What struck her most was the silence of it. There was no graffiti. No signs of life, not even the kind of chaotic energy you might expect from a neglected area. It was as if even the people who might have had reason to wander those streets had collectively decided to stay away. And as she drove deeper into it, heading toward the very edge of the delivery zone, she began to feel something she would later describe with perfect accuracy. Bone prickles. She'd heard that term on a podcast not long before. A guest had used it to describe fear, not the dramatic, heart-pounding terror of something jumping out at you, but the quieter, creeping kind. The kind where every cell in your body begins to tingle and hum with low-level alarm, and you cannot point to a single specific reason why. Your body knows something your conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. She was feeling that. Deeply. Just from the act of driving to an address. And then she arrived. On the very edge of this dead, hollow stretch of suburbia, one house was alive. Every window glowed with warm light. Music drifted out from behind the walls, something fun and energetic, pop-punk maybe, lively enough to carry out to the curb where she parked. It stood in stark contrast to the dark, boarded-up shells that surrounded it on either side. If that house had been the only occupied building on the entire block, she would not have been the least bit surprised. She gathered the thermal delivery bag, which was heavier than she expected given how large the order was, and she hauled herself up the driveway. She knocked. It took several knocks before the music faded and the door opened. The guy who answered was in his mid-20s. He was wearing a band t-shirt, and he had the kind of loose, slightly unfocused expression that suggested he might have been enjoying a relaxed evening in more than one sense of the word. He seemed friendly enough. Harmless, even. She explained she was there with a delivery, and he turned back into the house and called out to whoever else was inside, asking if anyone had ordered food. The confusion that followed was genuine and fairly amusing. He explained that there were only 3 of them in the house, and that they had already gotten a pizza delivery. Nobody seemed to know anything about a McDonald's order. She showed him the app, confirmed that the address was absolutely correct, and he asked her to wait on the porch while he checked with the other guys inside. She stood on that porch and listened. Muffled voices filtered through the walls. Then something that sounded like raised voices. Then something that could have been banging. The bone prickles returned, quiet but insistent. Then the guy was back, grinning apologetically, explaining that he was an idiot. Yes, the other guys had indeed ordered McDonald's on top of the pizza, and everything was perfectly fine. He began to apologize for the confusion. And then, just as she started to unzip the thermal bag, he held up a hand and asked her to hang on just one more moment. They wanted to give her a tip. $10, in cash. If she could just wait on the porch again while he went and got it. She told him it wasn't necessary. She told him the app handled tips just fine. But this guy was genuinely insistent, in the most cheerful and harmless possible way, and so she stayed. This time, he left the door slightly open as he headed back inside. She found herself idly glancing through the gap. The front room was surprisingly impressive, clean, well decorated, framed posters on the walls, a pair of pinball machines in one corner, and a large, expensive flat-screen television. It looked like a place where people genuinely enjoyed spending their time. She watched, half distracted, as her new acquaintance moved back and forth through what appeared to be the kitchen doorway, and then called down toward what looked like a basement staircase. She wondered briefly if they had a home theater set up down there. She wondered if this was one of those situations where someone deliberately purchases a property in a forgotten neighborhood precisely because the low-profile exterior hides something far nicer inside. It was none of her business either way. She was just there to deliver food. Eventually, he came back with $10.69, the obvious joke of which she acknowledged with a polite laugh. She handed over the bags of McDonald's, which she already knew were no longer anywhere near warm. She decided not to bring that up. He had kept her on that porch long enough. Goodbyes were exchanged, and she walked back down the driveway, slid into her car, and checked the app for the next job. Another order at the same McDonald's. Perfect. She started the car and began to pull away. Now, there is a small but important detail about her car. It has a reversing camera, and she relies on it more than she probably should. As a result, her rearview mirror is not positioned the traditional way. A while back, when she was taking her young niece and nephew out for a McDonald's run, funny enough, she had adjusted it to give her a better view of the back seat for the kids. She had never readjusted it back. So when she glanced up at the mirror out of habit as she started to drive away, instead of seeing the road behind her, she saw the back seat. And there was a man lying on the floor of it. He was roughly in his mid-20s. And he was holding a knife. She could not immediately place what kind. It was clearly some sort of kitchen implement, but unlike anything she had seen before. He was not moving. He was not looking at her. He was just lying there on the floor of her back seat with that blade in his hand, completely still, staring at nothing, as though he was simply waiting for something. The realization hit her in the gut like a physical blow. She had been kept on that porch. Kept busy long enough, at the door, then waiting for a tip, standing there with her back turned to her own vehicle, for someone to slip inside her unlocked car without her noticing. She had not expected to be away from it more than a minute or two. She had not locked the doors. She now regretted that with every fiber of her being. Her heart was hammering. Everything inside her was screaming. But she kept her face forward. She made absolutely certain that nothing in her expression or her posture suggested that she had seen him. She kept her driving speed completely steady. And up ahead, through the darkness, she spotted the glow of a gas station. She drove toward it at a perfectly normal speed. She gave nothing away. And then, in the last possible moment before she would have passed the turning, she hit the accelerator hard, screamed into the parking lot, threw the car into park, leapt out, and ran straight through the front door of that gas station. What came out of her mouth next was probably not the most coherent account of events anyone had ever delivered to a stranger behind a counter. Something about a delivery, Stoner McDonald's guys, a weird knife, a man in her back seat, how she'd been kept at the door, what he might have been planning, all of it tumbling out on top of itself in a breathless rush. The older gentleman at the register stared at her with the look of a man who was seriously questioning certain assumptions about his evening. He asked her to slow down and start from the beginning. And then he stopped. His mouth fell open. His eyes drifted past her, toward the window. She turned to follow his gaze. An extraordinarily tall man was unfolding himself from the back seat of her car, slowly, awkwardly, given how cramped the floor space must have been. Both of them watched in silence as he straightened up, took one look around him, and then ran. Not toward them. Away. Into the darkness at the edge of the lot, toward the tree line where the suburb gave way to woods. She would say later, and she means this sincerely, that the expression on his face as he fled did not look like the face of someone who had been caught in the middle of something terrible. It looked like the face of someone who was absolutely terrified themselves. She called the police regardless. They arrived quickly, searched the surrounding area, and found a knife nearby in the undergrowth. A fish knife, apparently, the kind used in sushi preparation. Nothing on it. When officers went to visit the house with the pinball machines and the warm glowing windows, they found exactly who they expected to find, 3 young men, all accounted for, none of whom matched the description she gave. Nobody there had any apparent connection to what had happened. She never found out who he was. She never found out what he was doing in her car or what he had intended. She kept her job. She did not consider quitting. What she did do, from that evening forward, was lock her car every single time she stepped out of it, no matter how briefly she thought she would be gone. And she checks the back seat. Every single time. Without exception. She ends her account with a thought that stays with you, something about that man's face as he ran, that raw, wide-eyed panic, makes her believe that whoever he was hiding from posed a far greater threat than he himself ever did. And in some ways, that is the part of this story that is the hardest to let go of. If any part of that story gave you that same prickling, unsettled feeling, you are definitely not alone. Drop a comment below and let us know what went through your mind during that one. And if something unexpectedly strange has ever happened to you during an ordinary errand or a simple task, we want to hear about it. This community is full of people who understand exactly what it means to carry a story like that around. Story 2, The Package from the Farm. Our next story comes from England. The writer is a postwoman, a postie, as they say over there, who has worked the same rural delivery route for years, thanks to a long-standing friendship with the head postmaster and more than a little determined pleading to keep her assignment. Postal workers in the UK tend to get shuffled from route to route with regularity, but she had held on to hers, and she knew it like the back of her hand. She knew her customers, too. Not intimately, but in the warm, familiar way that comes from years of small daily interactions. There was Stu, a mature student who practically vibrated with enthusiasm for marine biology and who had, over the course of many doorstep conversations, somehow managed to turn her into a genuine enthusiast of the subject as well. There was elderly Mrs. Rader, who seemed to have developed a new and increasingly dramatic medical condition approximately every other week and who relayed each one with the kind of gleeful relish that suggested. She considered her ailment something of a personal achievement. There were the Four Bottoms, a middle-aged polycule who spent their evenings as a gloriously theatrical glam rock band and their days pottering around in cardigans tending to their garden. And there were Joe and Joanne, a pair of wealthy twins who received Amazon parcels on an almost daily basis and who, despite being thoroughly spoiled by any objective measure, were among the most genuinely grateful young people she had ever encountered. And then there was Farmer Mackay. She had never really gotten to know him. He had a reputation on the route as someone who was decidedly unfriendly toward postal workers specifically, a grouchy, solitary man who lived alone in a small holding on the edge of town. To call it a farm would be stretching the definition considerably. It had a handful of goats, a couple of sheep, one pig, and some chickens. It was also, by every account and by her own direct observation, extraordinarily filthy, even relative to the inherently messy standards of farm life. As far as she could tell, he scraped together a modest living selling eggs and milk to local residents. In 6 years of working that route, she had never once had a delivery or collection associated with Mackay's farm. Which is why the day she found a collection booking for his property in her schedule was, to put it mildly, surprising. For those unfamiliar with how Royal Mail operates, it is possible to book a parcel collection, often free of charge, rather than making the trip to a post office yourself. Mackay had done exactly this. His booking included very specific instructions: do not knock, do not disturb the house, find the package in a designated outhouse, the location of which he had helpfully illustrated with a photograph so there would be no confusion. She wore her Wellington boots that day. Wise decision. The mud stretching across what Mackay grandly considered a yard was ankle-deep in places, thick and dark and deeply unpleasant, sucking at her feet with every step. The outhouse was right where the photograph indicated. She pushed open the door. The smell that greeted her nearly knocked her off her feet. She did not linger to investigate the source. The Royal Mail collection box was visible immediately, right at the front of the outhouse, and she grabbed it and turned around as quickly as she possibly could. One breath in that space had been more than enough. She was halfway back across the mud to her van when she noticed the parcel in her hands was leaking. A dark, foul-smelling liquid was seeping steadily through the bottom of the box, dripping from the corners, running down over her gloved hands. She stopped walking. She looked at it. There was absolutely no question, she could not accept this collection. Not for a dozen different reasons, all of them immediately obvious to anyone with a basic understanding of postal regulations. She could not abandon it either. Which meant she had to walk up to that front door and tell Farmer Mackay personally that his collection could not go through. She had barely made it halfway between the outhouse and the farmhouse when the bottom of the parcel gave way entirely. There is no gentle way to describe what happened next. The contents fell out all over her. Whatever had been packed inside that box, compressed, sodden, partially liquefied, distributed itself across her lower body and her torso with horrible efficiency. She stopped dead. She looked down. She had worked as a nursing assistant in her late teens and early 20s. She had encountered difficult smells in that line of work. She thought she had developed a reasonable tolerance. This dismantled that belief completely. Whatever this was, it was rotting. It was organic. It was far along in the process of decomposition. She dropped the ruined box and was sick where she stood, which, as she acknowledged later, did not exactly improve the overall situation. Standing there in the mud, covered in something she did not yet want to name, she began to actually look at what had spilled around her. And as she looked, a cold, creeping dread began to settle in alongside the nausea. Because unless her mind was playing a very cruel trick on her, and she desperately hoped it was, she could make out what appeared to be a section of vertebrae among the scattered remnants. Something that looked, horribly, unmistakably, like part of a human spine. And something else, small and pale and round, that caught the light in a way that made her stomach drop completely, an eyeball, looking fresher than the surrounding matter, which told her something she did not want to think about too carefully. She was standing alone, in the middle of an isolated property, in a part of the countryside where nobody was going to hear her. And she had suddenly become extremely aware of that fact. She was torn. Every sensible instinct she had said to get to her van and call for help. But something, perhaps the same stubborn, community-minded nature that had made her such a beloved fixture on this route for so many years, made her feel the pull of the front door. And so she started toward the house. The door began to open before she even reached the porch. For one terrible moment, she was certain she had made the worst decision of her life. But the man who appeared in the doorway was not Farmer Mackay. He was younger, significantly so. She could see the family resemblance clearly enough, but this was a much younger version of the man she had occasionally glimpsed from a distance. And when he took in the full, extraordinary sight of her, this post-woman standing in his grandfather's yard, soaked in unidentifiable liquid, trembling visibly, the expression that crossed his face was not threatening. It was guilt. Deep, genuine, hollow guilt. He did not invite her inside. She could hardly blame him for that. Instead, there on the doorstep, he explained. Farmer Mackay had been removed from the property by doctors the day before, following a prolonged and increasingly alarming deterioration in his behavior that, to the family's lasting shame, had gone unnoticed and unaddressed for far too long. The parcel collection, he explained, should have been cancelled the moment things began to unravel. It had simply been overlooked in the chaos. He apologized, sincerely and repeatedly, for everything. The grandson helped her hose off the worst of what covered her before she made her way back to the post van. And she might have been able to file the whole horrible afternoon away as a bizarre professional experience, unpleasant, unsettling, but ultimately explainable, if not for one final moment. As she crossed the mud toward her vehicle, she made the mistake of glancing into the old barn. It was only a glance. A second, maybe two, before she wrenched her eyes away. But it was enough. It has been enough to stay with her ever since, through every hot shower she took afterward, through every attempt to scrub the day from her memory. In the barn, Farmer Mackay had assembled all of his animals. She could not distinguish individual species anymore, they had merged into a single, vast, decaying mass. They had been there for some time. Arranged, she thought, with something resembling deliberate intent. Nearby sat a collection of empty cardboard boxes. He had been planning to mail them. Piece by piece, in parcels, to destinations unknown. She has never been able to find out who the original recipient of that day's collection was supposed to be. She has carried the weight of that unanswered question for years. Whether Mackay believed he was settling some old score, or whether some part of him genuinely thought he was fulfilling farm orders, she cannot say. Whatever condition had taken hold of him, whatever had been quietly dismantling his mind in the solitude of that small holding, it had taken him somewhere that made no sense to anyone on the outside. The Mackay property was demolished not long after. She cannot say she mourns it. Her route is quieter now, in more ways than one. Story 3, The Pizza Boy. This next one takes us back in time, all the way to the early 90s, and to a New York City that felt, in certain ways, like a very different world. The storyteller is a man reflecting on his teenage years, and he opens by freely admitting that narrative storytelling is not exactly his strong suit. He'll do his best, he says. And honestly, the story he has to tell more than compensates for any modesty about how he tells it. In those years, in New York, there was a pizza place. And not just any pizza place, a proper, beloved, neighborhood institution. Soul's Pizza, run by a couple he refers to as Pop Soul and Mama Soul, had been part of his life literally as long as he could remember. He had celebrated birthdays there as a small child. The place was only really designed for a handful of dine-in customers, but that had never stopped anyone. And as the years went by and the birthday tradition gave way to just ordering copious amounts of Soul's Pizza pies for any occasion, or no occasion at all, his attachment to the place only deepened. His father was a regular, had gotten to know Pop Soul personally over years of loyalty, and it was through that connection that the storyteller landed what he describes, with entirely genuine enthusiasm, as close to a dream job as a teenage boy could hope for. He would be a bicycle delivery boy for Soul's Pizza. It came with a free pizza every week. It came with a 10% discount on all orders. And it meant getting paid to ride his bike all over the city, which he loved doing anyway. He was good at it, too. Pop Soul told him, with the kind of enthusiastic warmth that defines a certain type of older man, that he was the best delivery boy the place had ever had, that hiring him had been the best decision Pop had made since marrying Mama Soul. Whether this was completely accurate was beside the point. The praise was generous and the free pizzas were extraordinary, and for the first few months, everything was going beautifully. Then came the fateful order. Double pepperoni. Extra cheese. Side of garlic bread. The delivery address was downtown, somewhere unfamiliar to him, but he checked the map, worked out his route, loaded up the insulated bag, and set off on his bike. The destination turned out to be a warehouse district. A maze of identical metal structures stretching out in rows. He slowed to a stop, trying to work out which of these identical buildings was Warehouse 13, when a van came shrieking around a corner and braked to a stop so close to his front wheel that he felt the wash of displaced air. Before he had fully processed what was happening, 4 men in masks came piling out of the back of that van. Each one grabbed a limb. He was lifted clean off his bicycle, his thrashing effectively neutralized by the sheer coordination of it, and thrown into the back of the van. The first thing he said, and he is aware of how absurd this sounds, was something along the lines of, "Hey, there is a pizza on that bike and it is going to get cold and I have a 35-minute delivery guarantee." One of the masked men in the back of the van found this so genuinely funny that he could barely contain himself. Another slapped the dividing wall as a signal to drive. The crunch of his bicycle being run over vibrated through the floor of the van. And then he felt a small, sharp prick at the side of his neck, and that was the last thing he knew for a while. He woke up in a basement. A carpeted, reasonably well-appointed basement, which he notes with some irony that he found oddly reassuring given the circumstances. 2 of the men were present. Their masks remained on. In every spy thriller and action movie he had ever watched, this was generally considered a promising sign. People who do not want to be identified tend to be people who intend to let you walk away. They told him he would be fine as long as he stayed quiet, stayed put, and did what he was told. 3 days. He spent 3 days in that basement. He was given 1 meal a day and water on request. He was escorted to an adjacent bathroom whenever he needed it. And the meals, here is where it gets almost comically strange, were pizza. Every single time. Not from Soul's Pizza, where he worked, but from a rival establishment a few blocks away. He became convinced, sitting there on the carpet with his daily slice, that some kind of territorial pizza war had reached its natural conclusion and he had somehow ended up in the middle of it. He was not entirely wrong about the tension. He was very wrong about the specifics. After 3 days of low-grade threats, reasonable treatment, and considerably more rival pizza than any person should consume in 72 hours, the needle found his neck again. And the next thing he knew, he was lying on the pavement outside Soul's Pizza. Which was now closed. Boarded up. Yellow crime scene tape stretched across the boards. He gathered himself, made his way to a nearby pharmacy for something to address the headache that had taken up residence behind his eyes, and found, to his bafflement, that the masked men had tucked a $20 bill into his shirt pocket at some point before releasing him. He had been carrying no cash when they grabbed him. He went to the police station and told his story. And the reaction of the desk sergeant was, to put it kindly, peculiar. There was a reluctance there. A sense of going through motions rather than taking genuine interest. And then the sergeant looked at him with something like quiet knowledge and told him to consider himself fortunate, because the people he had worked for, those warm and beloved fixtures of his neighborhood childhood, were not, it turned out, good people. Not good people at all. There had been a raid, the sergeant said, while he was conveniently absent. Wasn't it something, the way these things worked out? And then the sergeant passed along his regards to his much older brother, who was, as it happened, a police officer himself, working vice, at another department. The pieces fell into place slowly, and then all at once. His brother had known. Known what Sol's Pizza really was, what was operating behind the warmth and the pizza pies and the free weekly slices. And rather than pull his little brother aside and explain it plainly, rather than do the obvious, sensible, direct thing, his brother had arranged for a group of his colleagues to take the kid off the street for 3 days, keep him safe and out of the way, and return him once the operation was complete. Fed him pizza from a rival joint as what was probably someone's idea of a joke. And sent him home with $20 and a story he would spend the rest of his life trying to make sense of. His brother has since passed away. There is no one left to ask. But he chooses to believe, and perhaps this is the most generous and human interpretation available, that his brother was watching out for him in the only way he knew how. That those 3 strange days in that carpeted basement were an act of love, however bizarre and roundabout and frankly terrifying in execution. That the alternative, staying on that route, making that delivery, being present when the raid went down, might have cost him everything. He will never know for certain. But he chooses that version. And honestly, who could blame him? Story 4, The Christmas Card Run. Not every story of unexpected danger begins in a dark alley or an empty warehouse. Some of them begin on a crisp December morning, with a grandmother, a stack of handwritten Christmas cards, and the most wholesome tradition imaginable. This story comes from a man looking back on a particular incident from his childhood, a period of his life that, by his own account, was made infinitely better by the steady, loving presence of his maternal grandparents. His home life with his mother had been complicated, fragile, and frequently unkind, and from a young age he had found in his grandparents' house the stability and warmth he needed. Grandma doted on him. Grandpa was a former military man, disciplined, stoic, firm in his expectations, but in his own measured way, deeply respectful of the boy. He loved them both. And one of the traditions he treasured most, right up until a certain December morning, was the annual Christmas card delivery run. Grandma had a long list of people she cared about within driving distance, and she was not the sort of woman who simply dropped a card in the post when she could look someone in the eye and hand it to them personally. Every year, in early December, she and her grandson would set off together on a multi-day card delivery circuit, working through the list household by household. It felt, to him, like the official beginning of Christmas itself. On this particular morning, they were headed to the home of an elderly couple, friends of his grandparents from their regular bingo circle. We will call them the Jameses. Mr. James was the quiet type, softly spoken, bespectacled, absorbed in model trains and birdwatching. He had never served in the military, something the storyteller's grandfather had noted more than once with an air of regretful sympathy, as though the man had been somehow shortchanged by fate. Mrs. James, on the other hand, was famously what people in those days would have called a firecracker. She had strong opinions, a sharp tongue, and a well-established history of confronting bingo hall newcomers she suspected of cheating. The plan was simple. Walk to the front door, push the card through the mail slot, and leave. They might knock, spend a few minutes exchanging pleasantries if the moment felt right. But the Jameses were not really small-talk people. Friendly enough to be on the list, not quite warm enough for a long visit. They had barely reached the front door when the world exploded. That is not an exaggeration. A shotgun blast tore through the front door from the inside, sending splinters flying outward in every direction. He dove left on pure instinct. His grandmother dove right. By some extraordinary stroke of fortune, neither of them was hit. They landed on either side of the porch, ears ringing, completely disoriented. And then, through the noise and confusion and the high-pitched whine in their ears, they became aware of voices inside the house. Mrs. James, screaming at her husband about a woman he had apparently been seeing. Mr. James, responding in a tone of extraordinary and frankly baffling calm, explaining that Mrs. James needed to be reasonable about this situation and that the woman in question meant nothing to him. Another shotgun blast went off inside the house. Somewhere, a window shattered. Now. At this point, any reasonable person, would have stood up and run for the car as fast as their legs could carry them. And the storyteller has wondered, many times since, why his grandmother did not do exactly that. But Grandma, it turns out, was a woman who was deeply and constitutionally incapable of walking away from a good piece of neighborhood gossip while it was actively unfolding in front of her. She pressed her finger to her lips. She pointed to a low brick wall. She gestured for him to crouch down behind it and stay there. And he did. Because she was Grandma. So there they crouched, the two of them, behind a brick wall outside a house where an elderly woman was intermittently discharging a shotgun at her husband while conducting what was, in its own deeply alarming way, a reasonably coherent marital argument. He was trembling. Grandma, by all indications, was riveted. Then another blast fired off, this one bursting through the window directly above where they were hiding. A piece of buckshot grazed his ear. He screamed. That got Grandma moving. What followed, he recalls with a mixture of trauma and genuine admiration, can only be described as a display of remarkable physical capability from a woman of her age and build. She scooped him up, properly up, over her shoulder, and ran for the car with a speed that suggested she had been holding something in reserve for exactly this kind of situation. She got the driver's side door open, deposited him through it, climbed in behind him, and drove around the corner before either of them said a single word. By then, sirens were already audible in the distance. Someone in the neighborhood had called the police. Grandma's response to this was brisk and practical. They had cards to deliver. They did not have time to give statements. Besides, nobody knew they had been there. Mrs. James was ultimately charged with criminal damage, reckless handling of a firearm, and related offenses. She received a suspended sentence, helped in no small part by her husband's decision not to press charges. The couple, improbably, stayed together. His grandparents quietly removed the Jameses from the Christmas card list and never visited them socially again. They never let on to the Jameses that they had been there that day. And for that, the storyteller says he is profoundly grateful, because he is genuinely not certain he could have handled a face-to-face apology from Mrs. James for the near miss. He and Grandma continued their card delivery tradition for several years after that. The route was simply one stop shorter. Give this video a like if you are genuinely grateful for the ordinary, uneventful days in your own life right now. And share it with someone you love, because some of these stories are worth hearing with someone else in the room. Story 5, The Exploding Package. Before we go any further, this narrator wants to be perfectly honest with you. He was not a good person during this particular chapter of his life. He is older now. He knows better now. And he is telling this story, in part, as a kind of public reckoning with a version of himself he is not especially proud of. In college, he was the class clown. The smug prankster. The guy who genuinely believed he was funnier than he was and who had just enough charm to delay the moment when everyone around him figured out the gap between those two things. His antics caught the attention of a fraternity that was looking for a particular type of pledge, namely, the kind who would do almost anything for a laugh and could be relied upon to enthusiastically one-up everyone else in any hazing situation. He pledged. He loved the hazing. He was the center of attention, which was all he really wanted. It was around this time that a particular category of prank had become newly popular on certain corners of the internet. Amazon had risen dramatically in scale and reach, and in those days, their delivery standards had not yet caught up with their ambitions. Packages appeared on front doorsteps and in yards, unattended, with minimal security. Ring doorbells existed only in the homes of people who could genuinely afford them, which was a small minority. And the result was that packages left out in the open were, functionally, there for the taking. He is not proud of what comes next. Over a period of time, he stole somewhere upward of 15 packages from strangers' doorsteps. Most of the contents were completely mundane: vitamins, a dog bowl, a small soft toy, some exercise equipment. Occasionally something slightly more interesting. None of it was worth much. Most of it went straight in the trash. The theft was the point. The documentation of it for the delight of his fraternity brothers was the point. And then one day he saw a package that felt different. It was large. It sat on a doorstep radiating the kind of promise that only an oversized cardboard box can project. Something valuable was in there. He could feel it. He had his fellow pledge filming the whole thing, the cautious approach, the hoodie pulled up, the elaborate low crawl across the front yard that he imagined looked extremely cool and in reality looked nothing of the sort. He grabbed the package with both hands and pulled. It exploded. Not a novelty glitter bomb. Not a clever internet prank retaliation. A genuine, fire-producing, skin-scorching explosion that hit him directly in the face and chest, melting the synthetic fabric of his hoodie against his skin and leaving him screaming on the front lawn in immediate, overwhelming agony. His cameraman was already gone before the echo of the blast had faded. And then, from the bushes and the surrounding darkness, they came. A group of masked men who had, apparently, been waiting. They knew. They had prepared for exactly this. They descended on him while he was still on the ground, still screaming, still unable to see clearly, and they delivered a very thorough, very decisive physical verdict on his behavior. They told him, between blows, exactly what they thought of him. That he was a thief. That he was everything rotten about a certain kind of entitled young person. That he was a disgrace. He lay there and took it, and he cannot honestly say, even looking back now, that the punishment was entirely undeserved. What he can say is that the physical consequences, a shattered eye socket, a permanent limp, a shattered arm that required a steel rod to reconstruct, may have crossed a line even given the provocation. But at the time, he convinced himself he had earned every bit of it. The paramedics were called by a neighbor. He told them he had been attacked by a rival group of college students. He told the police the same thing and asked them not to pursue it. They seemed, he noted, almost relieved to let it go. Months later, in a moment of something between guilt and compulsion, he drove back to that house. A young family lived there now. Children playing in the yard. Nothing about it suggested any connection to what had happened to him. He has never resolved whether the violence came from the household directly or from some wider network of people who had taken it upon themselves to deal with people like him. He does not pursue that question. He is not sure he wants the answer. What he knows is that he did not join that fraternity. He moved into a regular dormitory, started attending a weekly chess club, and built the quieter, more honest life he should have been living all along. Story 6, The Woman in the Trailer. 18 years on the road. That is a long time to spend behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler, accumulating stories about the strange and the unexpected. Our next narrator is a long-haul trucker, proud owner and operator of a truck she has named Lucy, and the story she is sharing tonight comes from her early years on the job, back when she was still young enough to find everything about the open road exciting rather than familiar. Back in those days, she loved the CB radio. Loved the constant low-level hum of other drivers talking across the dark miles. She would join in, chat, argue, joke. One voice she encountered regularly was a man who went by the call sign Boxcar Willie, apparently a reference to a country singer of the same name. Hers was Ironhide, which she considered a highly clever double meaning given that she spent the majority of her working hours sitting on her rear end. Boxcar Willie was, by any reasonable assessment, an absolute liar. A magnificent, committed, entertaining liar who claimed, with total and unshakable conviction, to have encountered Bigfoot on a mountain road, to have evidence of cryptid activity stored in his remote trailer, and to possess insight into the paranormal that most humans simply were not equipped to appreciate. She knew he was making it up. She also could not stop listening. On this particular night, the conversation had worked its way through aliens, Bigfoot, and something involving a chupacabra, at which point she realized that all this discussion of the strange and mysterious had made her genuinely hungry. She pulled into the next rest stop, went inside, and purchased 2 hot dogs that had been rotating on a grill for what was clearly far longer than any health code would sanction. She loaded them extravagantly with onions, mustard, and ketchup, grabbed an enormous crushed ice slushie, and settled back into the cab with the satisfaction of a person who has made a completely defensible set of choices. She pulled back out onto the highway, bragged appropriately to Boxcar Willie and any other listeners about the quality of her hot dogs, and settled in for the next 100 miles of straight, clear road ahead of her. That was when she heard the noise from the back. A sound from inside the trailer. Not the normal settling and shifting that cargo produces, something with slightly more intent to it. She mentioned it to Willie, who naturally had a story about a trucker who had heard the exact same thing, only in his version there was a cryptid involved and everyone ended up significantly worse off. She told herself it was loose cargo. She drove on. The sound came back. This time she was fairly sure she was hearing footsteps. She pulled onto the shoulder, scanned the darkness for oncoming lights, and got out. She had to use the bathroom anyway, and she decided to deal with both matters while she was stopped. She walked around to the rear of the trailer. It was fully sealed. Properly, professionally locked and secured. The chances of anyone having gotten in while she was at the rest stop were genuinely slim. She told herself this. And then she reached up and pulled open the back doors anyway, half laughing, mentally composing the sarcastic announcement she would make to the empty trailer. The doors flew outward instead. An elderly woman came launching out of the trailer with an energy that bore absolutely no relationship to her apparent age or physical condition. She was wearing a pair of torn jeans and nothing else above the waist. In her hand, and here the trucker recognized it immediately, because it was hers, was the utility knife she kept in the trailer for cutting through plastic packaging ties. The woman hissed. She actually hissed. And then she lunged, and with a force that the trucker still finds difficult to believe when she remembers it, she shoved her backwards hard enough that the resulting fall left her with a bruised tailbone that lasted a full week. The knife sliced the air near her as a warning, more territorial than murderous, somehow, and then the woman turned and disappeared around the side of the cab. The trucker scrambled to her feet and followed. She found the woman sitting in the driver's seat of her 18-wheeler. Calmly eating the second hot dog. With an expression of complete and profound contentment on her face. She locked the cab door from outside using the key fob and called the police. It took over an hour for them to arrive. During that hour, she stood outside her own truck and watched as the woman finished the hot dog, drank the rest of the slushie, and then simply fell asleep behind the steering wheel of a vehicle weighing approximately 40 tons. When the officers arrived and extracted the woman, they were unable to get a coherent account from her. She appeared to speak no English at all. The cargo in the back was completely undamaged. The trucker declined to press charges, on the condition that the woman receive proper care and support. She shared the story on the CB radio as she completed her delivery. Boxcar Willie, naturally, had a ghost story about a translucent elderly woman matching the description who haunted a specific stretch of highway. This time, for the first time, she could hear clearly that he was improvising. Real fear, she thought, has a texture that ghost stories simply cannot replicate. She still wonders how the woman got into that trailer. Her best guess is that it happened during the original cargo load, hours before she ever set off. If that is the case, that woman spent somewhere around 6 hours in the dark back there before the hot dogs and the open road finally lured her out. She tries not to think about it too much. But she is glad it was her who found her, and not some unsuspecting worker at the delivery end of the route. Story 7, The Paper Boy. This one comes to us secondhand, a story told by a father, with his full knowledge and permission, through the voice of his child who is now an adult old enough to pass it along. The father was a paperboy in the 1960s. He took the work seriously in a way that set him apart from most of his contemporaries. While other boys flung papers from their bikes without breaking speed, he stopped at every house, climbed off, walked to the door, and placed the paper gently on the front stoop. This small extra effort made him popular with his customers in a genuine way. Come Christmas, more than a few of his regular stops would have a thank you note and a small cash tip waiting for him. One of his customers, an older woman on the route, had always seemed pleasant enough in passing. But around February, not Christmas, not a holiday, just an ordinary February day, he arrived at her house to find something different. She was waiting for him on the porch. She invited him inside for a drink, with a warm and friendly manner that included the suggestion that there might be a small financial reward waiting for him as well. He was 8 years old and she was a kind-looking older woman, and so he went inside and sat with her and accepted the drink she offered him. And then he woke up tied to a dining room chair. The woman was in the room with him. She was not dressed. She was saying things, incoherent, unsettling things, about loneliness and need and wanting a man's company, which was obviously deeply alarming coming from a grown adult addressing an 8-year-old boy. Now here is where the story takes a turn that is, all things considered, remarkably fortunate. She was not a careful not-tear. An 8-year-old with enough motivation and a reasonable degree of panic can work loose from an inadequately secured binding fairly quickly, and this child had both of those things in abundance. He got free, screamed his way out of the house, got on his bicycle, and rode as fast as he possibly could back to the grocery store that employed him. The owner of the store took him aside. And then, in what the family still considers a deeply strange addendum to an already deeply strange afternoon, offered him $10, a meaningful sum of money in those days, to keep quiet about what had happened. He also promised that the paperboy would never have to deliver to that address again. The 8-year-old. Without the emotional vocabulary or the life experience to process any of this as anything other than a bewildering series of events, took the money and kept the promise. The woman passed away not long after. The why and the how of it all was never discussed or explained. It has since become something of a family legend, one of those stories that surfaces at gatherings, told with the mixture of disbelief and dark humor that families develop around the things that are simply too strange to treat any other way. The message, as this family sees it, is simple. There are strange people in the world. Be careful. And perhaps pay particularly close attention to the ones who seem harmless on the surface. Story 8, The Pizza Delivery Assault. Our final story is the most recent, the most bewildering, and in some ways the most strangely wholesome, given that it ends with free pizza and a genuinely unresolved moral dilemma. Our narrator is a college student living alone in a neighborhood he diplomatically describes as not the safest. It is 10 o'clock on an ordinary evening. His girlfriend is elsewhere, studying. He hears a crash from outside and mentally files it under the general category of neighborhood ambient noise. Then someone knocks on his door. He looks through the peephole. A young man is standing there in the full, unmistakable uniform of a very well-known national pizza delivery brand. Behind him, clearly visible, is a branded company delivery vehicle. The storyteller does not remember ordering pizza, but his girlfriend occasionally surprises him with food orders, so he opens the door. He begins to explain that he did not personally place an order. Is there perhaps a note? Is he at the right address? The delivery driver looks at him. And then removes the pizza from the insulated bag. And throws it directly into his face. We are talking about a full, hot, fresh pizza. Molten cheese. Scalding sauce. Hitting him in the face at close range, covering his eyes, and then beginning to slide down his face and neck in the worst possible way. He is in immediate, genuine pain. He is trying to process the situation through a filter of shock and agony and pizza. He is attempting to form a coherent sentence and wipe the burning dairy product from his eyes simultaneously. And then the driver kicks him. Squarely, deliberately, and with considerable force, directly in a place that no man should ever be kicked. He goes down. The pizza completes its journey from his face to the floor. He is on his knees, not entirely sure if he is actually going to survive this moment. And through the pain, he hears the driver's voice, high-pitched, cracking slightly with youth and emotion, saying, "This is for my mother, you absolute piece of garbage." He has absolutely no idea who this person is. He has no idea who the mother is. He has no idea what he is supposed to have done. His mind is running through possibilities at a remarkable speed given the circumstances. And then the delivery driver stops. A beat of terrible silence. And then, in a completely different register, quieter, younger, horrified, "Oh God. I'm so sorry. I have the wrong address. I'm so sorry." The storyteller looks up through the tears that are a perfectly natural physiological response to what just happened and watches the driver sprint across the yard, leap into the branded delivery vehicle, and drive away at a speed that suggests the driver is also processing quite a lot right now. Inside, cleaned up, he calls the pizza company. The person who answers sounds young and already apologetic before he has said a single word. She begs him not to call the police. She tells him that if he knew the full context, he would understand why this happened. She cannot share that context with him. But she can offer, the next 3 pizzas on the house, and 1 free pizza every 6 months going forward. He thinks about it. He is a college student. He is not seriously injured. He has, genuinely, a story that is going to be entertaining for the rest of his life. And if someone did something genuinely harmful to this kid's mother, something serious enough to produce this level of misguided, wrongly directed, physically expressed outrage, then honestly, somewhere in there, he can understand the energy even if not the execution. He takes the deal. He does not call the police. The first free pizza has already arrived. He wants to know, did he do the right thing? Well, friends, what do you think? Let him know in the comments below. And while you are down there, tell us, which of tonight's stories stayed with you the most? Which delivery, which route, which seemingly ordinary job led to the moment that made you genuinely hold your breath? These are the stories that remind us that the world is stranger, more unpredictable, and more deeply human than our comfortable routines tend to let us see. Every single person in these accounts was just doing their job. Moving through the world in good faith. And in a single ordinary moment, something shifted. Some of them walked away with nothing more than a story to tell. Some of them walked away changed. Some of them are still not entirely sure what they walked away from. But they are here. They are talking about it. And that matters. Thank you so much for spending this evening with us. If you are not already subscribed, please take a moment to hit that button and ring the notification bell. We release new videos every week, and you do not want to miss what is coming next. And if you have your own story, something that happened on the job, on the road, at a stranger's door, we would genuinely love to hear it. Leave it in the comments or reach out directly. You never know whose evening your story might be exactly what they needed. Until next time, stay safe out there. Lock your cars. Check your back seats. And remember, the ordinary is only ordinary until it isn't. Take care of yourselves, friends.